I'll call the meeting to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Barry Eckerson, Dustin Allred,
Present.
Jane Billman, Andrew Fell, Tyler Finch,
Here.
Lou Hopkins, Nancy Odrago,
Here.
Jonah Weiskopf,
Here.
Shinchi Yu.
We do have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No.
Approval of the minutes, and we have two sets. We'll do them separately. The first one is from the April 4th, 2019 Plan Commission meeting. Motion by Mr. Fell.
I'll second it. I wasn't here.
Second by Mr. Hopkins, who wasn't here. I guess that's legal.
Yes, because he could have reviewed the video online, actually,
Correct,
and gotten
correct.
up to speed.
And undoubtedly did. So we have, I do have one change, and this is on page 4. The third paragraph, it says, the beginning at the end of the second sentence, a representative from the University of Illinois, comma. I believe that would have been a representative of the University of Illinois Foundation, because the university can't really sell property, not like this was. So just for the record. All in favor of approving the minutes by voice vote, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the minutes are approved. The minutes of the June 6, 2019 Plan Commission meeting. Any motions? Motion by Mr. Fell.
I'll second that one. I did actually watch that video.
Motion by Mr. Hopkins. Are there any changes to the minutes? Okay, by voice vote, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, those minutes are approved. Communications. We
There
have
was, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, go ahead. I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to, it'll be read into the record. It is essentially regarding Plan Case 2377T19, and it really relates to the two principal uses on a property, and essentially wants to ensure that setbacks and total living space and floor area ratio limits are observed. Recommended some clarifying language. So we can discuss that further if necessary during the case. So now we have continued public hearings. Plan Case 2359T18, application by the zoning administrator to amend the zoning ordinance with changes to Article 2, Article 5, Article 6, and other relevant sections to facilitate solar energy system installation. This case will be continued to the September 5th, 2019 meeting. Excuse me. We now have Plan Case 2377T19, an application by the zoning administrator to amend the ordinance with changes to Article 2, Article 5, Article 6, Article 7, Article 8, Article 9, Article 11, 12, and 13. This is an omnibus text amendment.
Hello, everybody.
Ms.
Thank you
Wilcox.
so much. So we discussed the proposed text amendments in detail at the last meeting on June 6th. The case was continued to this meeting, and I'm going to go over a couple of things. A couple things have changed, and I'm going to go through that really fast. So after that meeting, we had a very a good suggestion from Bill Brown, and I've had it highlighted here. As you can see, there's a new text. Lou, can you read it? Here, you want me to zoom in? Here we go. So there's, once we get into the exemptions that were added previously, but before June 6th, we added one extra line in exemptions for R3 zoning district. No more than 2 principal structures are allowed. What was added was no lot will have more than 2 dwelling units. There was a concern that potentially someone could try to make a case that, or get the impression that you could have two duplexes on an R3 lot. Of course, you can't because of density. But so that was added in here just to make sure that we were clear. Yeah.
Can I ask a question along the way? Sure.
Just out of curiosity, I don't know anywhere else in the zoning ordinance we have language that says no lot will have more. I mean, it seems like language we don't have anywhere else. No lot will have any more. It's like,
We'll have more than.
I mean, we can clean that up.
do you understand what I mean?
More
It just
legalese.
seems kind of ambiguous in a way.
Okay, we will make it less ambiguous, but do you all know what it means?
I believe so.
Yes.
Okay. We will make it more consistent with other language that we've used elsewhere in time for council.
Okay,
All right.
please continue.
All right, great. And then addressing the correspondence that you should have received and you will have right in front of you. The respondence was taken in, and I would like to make a quick comment about that, since Tyler Fitch already kind of described what the comment was about. Currently, in our zoning ordinance, with this change or without this change, you would not be able to, by right, diverge from any of the zoning ordinance for development regulations. So without coming to a zoning board of appeal and asking for the necessary approvals and being granted maybe a major variance or minor variance, depending on what that variance would be. So wanted to address that. And then there was an outstanding issue. So on June 6th, Tyler Fitch brought up the question to staff about whether, I'm going to pull it up really fast, whether we should have may or, let me. So going back to that same section, so in the memo, if you go to the revised, the supplemental memo, or if you're looking at the original, there's two memos that you've been sent.
If you're in attachment A of the May 31st memo, or excuse me, Exhibit B, which is the revisions, it would be the second page under Article 5 Use Regulations.
There's a lot of paper there.
Or, forgive me, the third page.
This is the same item, right?
This is the same item, absolutely, yeah. Okay, so right here we have, before issuing the building permit, the zoning administrator may require the owner to sign a covenant running with the land stating the lot and new structure cannot be subdivided without meeting subdivision requirements of the city. If so, the zoning administrator shall record this covenant at the owner's expense. So staff had discussed maybe some potential lots that could legally be subdivided, while also currently in its condition, it would be one lot building a second structure by right, but meeting our zoning ordinance and development regulations. In those cases, if the lot could legally be separated and the additional structure was something that would meet our requirements in the subdivision ordinance, that it would not be required, or it would be, it might cause some confusion by requiring us to record a covenant running with the land, stating that the lot cannot be subdivided.
It would also be an additional expense that would be unnecessary in our minds.
Yes. So I'd like to address that. And then with that, I'd like to address the staff findings for the case. That was again discussed at length on June 6th. Summary of findings from staff was that the proposed amendment will assist with daily administration and enforcement of the zoning ordinance by improving clarity and updating language to meet current professional practices. The proposed amendment is consistent with the goals and objectives of the 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan regarding updating various sections of the zoning ordinance. 3, the proposed amendment will update the zoning ordinance to ensure that the regulatory environment more closely matches the goals and the policies of the city. 4, the proposed amendment conforms to the notification and other requirements for the zoning ordinances as required by the State Zoning Act. The Plan Commission has the following options for Plan Case 2377T19. 1, forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve as presented. 2, forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve as modified by specific suggested changes. Or 3, forward this case to City Council with a recommendation to deny. Based on the evidence presented in the discussion above, and without the benefit of considering additional evidence that may be presented at the public hearing, staff recommends that the Plan Commission forward Plan Case number 2377-T-19 to the Urbana City Council with a recommendation to approve in its entirety the proposed multi-part text amendment to the zoning ordinance.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Wilcott?
I'm not sure how we're going to handle questions versus discussion.
If you have a question, go now. If you've got,
So I'm going to treat this as a question. I was not here the last time. I did listen to the video. I did not catch what the point of changing parcel to properties was in the historic preservation. I'm wondering if.
Oh, yeah.
That's a question.
Yeah, absolutely. Our legal division came up to, noted to planning staff that there were 4 different definitions of owner in our historic preservation article, and that we should really choose one. And we worked with our legal division to use the city code definition of a property owner for the historic preservation article. So we ended up changing.
So the issue is that you're relying on a definition of property owner rather than the definition of parcel owner?
Yes, for historic preservation cases, when the case gets presented, the property owner and the parcel owner are going to have similar roles as far as for historic preservation cases.
Is there a possibility that these are 2 different persons in the general sense of persons?
Are you talking about private property? So like the building has owned, but the land has...
Okay, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah.
There's a particular thing that's going on here, and it seems to me it potentially matters because it affects the number of persons who count as persons who get to object when you have to have a percentage of objections. I just don't understand what's going on.
Well, to address that concern, so you're referring to that term that I can't think of right now, but it's based on properties, not people. So if you want to submit an objection, it's based on a percentage of the number of properties. So the number of people and owners, that doesn't matter.
But the number of properties can be different from the number of parcels? How do we decide what a property is? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Because for everything else we do it by parcel. As we have a parcel tax number, we have a deed to a parcel. We don't have a deed to a property. So I don't know what a property is. Yeah.
I wasn't here for the original discussion, but it just reminds me that different entities use the 2, and you have public entities, same parcel a lot, with like banks, for example, same property. But I want to mention that, but I don't know if it matters in this case or not, but I feel like, yeah, I just feel like
Okay.
parcel is more our line of work.
So-
But maybe I'm wrong, you know? I just
Well,
thought I'd mention.
Yeah, we could probably,
Mention
hash
it,
through
define
it.
it by what it isn't or something.
I mean,
but-
yeah, the
There isn't a
question,
difference we know about.
No, and so usually we do refer to property many times in the zoning ordinance, and we're referring to the land. And oftentimes when people say there's private property and there's real property, And that's generally what we're in the line of business, which is generally distinguished between parcel lines, which makes up a parcel. So for, like I said, for the case in for historic preservation cases and when they come along, the property owner, and as defined by the city code, this was actually something that came up June 6th, and we looked up city code. For our particular cases, we're actually talking about the property. So for instance, and that actually brings up there are a couple of cases that have come up for historic designation that maybe what was historic about the property was something that doesn't exist anymore in form of a building, but the land itself is actually something that was the historic part that gets a designation, just to illustrate as an example. And so, again, I think we use property owner quite a few times.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
My reaction is, I think it's not going to be a problem. I was wondering why it was changed everywhere, as if there was something important about change.
I think it was just consistency with a lot of the ordinance. So we use property a lot, and I don't see that we use parcel a lot. And this thing is full of inconsistencies, so on those rare occasions when we find them, we want to correct them.
Can I weigh in? Can we ask legal staff to at least look at that?
Oh, they've reviewed this.
Because my brain
Yeah.
says a parcel is a piece of ground, and property is a piece of ground with some improvement on it. A house is part of a property, but it's not part of the parcel.
They've reviewed it, and not only that, it came from them. They really wanted us to make it simpler and actually use the same consistent language throughout the. So they're trying to encourage. It was legal staff trying to encourage the zoning ordinance to be more consistent.
Any further questions? All right, thank you very much.
Anytime.
Apparently, we won't need any public input on this tonight, so we'll just go right into discussion. Any points of discussion anybody wants to bring up?
So this item we've been talking about, that I wasn't, I mean, not the parcel, right, what I was thinking is, parcel property, why not? We usually talk about lots now, okay? So, this piece about two principal structures.
Right.
I have either questions or inability to understand what we're up to, one or the other. Let's see, I've got to get the right version of this. It goes from the current language as opposed to the totally new. Okay. As I understand the current language, it requires a conditional use permit for all zoning districts.
Can I answer that?
Except multifamily, where multifamily is defined as 3 or more units.
Yes.
Okay, so the focus on garage conversions is a little ironic to me because we're actually changing the whole set of categories about multiple structures, and there's no discussion of the effect of that or the reason for that. So I don't understand why we're doing that. So, I mean, that's sort of one way to start out. The focus is on these garage conversions, based in part on a quick look from Google, which I realize is not the best way to measure 5 feet versus 18 inches. Other than the one on South Poplar, it appears to me that these garage conversions amount to the conversion of an accessory use under, it's more complicated than this, but generally 750 square feet. which can be within 18 inches of a property line, into a principal use, which has to meet principal use setback requirements, which are 10 feet from the rear and 5 feet from the side in a R3. That leads me to believe that most garage conversions of the type we're talking about would have to go to ZBA anyway, because they need a variance. And I'm partly curious whether any of these four needed variances. And if so, why we're doing what we're doing? I mean, I'm,
Is that a question for staff? Is it?
yeah.
It sounded like sort of a
I just wanted to
question.
be sure if it was rhetorical or directed for us. Some do require variances, as you've noted. If it's new construction, which has been a case, that didn't need a variance because it could be constructed to meet the setbacks. So this change would address both conversions, if it works out, or new construction. And, I mean, there is a long-term goal to look at this issue more holistically, but this was a way at least to get closer and perhaps recognize that this is a historic use of property and perhaps should be considered as an acceptable way when the density isn't changing.
Okay. Now, given the wording, it implies that there could be more than one use on a parcel. Can you give me an example? So, all the examples that we've been given as a reason for doing this are duplexes in 2 buildings in R3, which is indeed the only residential category in which this applies, because you can't do it in 1 or 2, and if you're in R4 and up, there's already a specific exception in the ordinance that multifamily dwelling can be in multiple structures on one lot. So it seems to me like we're shooting a rocket to hit a particular spot on the moon, and we may not need quite what we're shooting at it.
Is that a question? Or would you
Well, I
like
don't
an
know what it's,
explanation?
I mean, other people were here for the discussion. I don't know what.
We didn't get this far into it last time. We talked about other things. I did have a question about this particular issue as well. Now, but to the point of the communication that Ms. Wilcock addressed, my understanding is if it doesn't meet the setback, for example, in this, that there would have to be a variance or a conditional use permit, or
Well,
there'd have to be a variance, right?
yeah,
That's
but
what I'm
not a
unclear about.
conditional use permit.
Correct. That's what I'm unclear about.
As it is currently written.
What are you unclear about, Chair Fitch?
What happens if somebody proposes wanting to build something that's 18 inches from the line over their garage, an apartment? So they required to seek a variance?
Yes.
But not a conditional use permit under the proposed language.
That's correct.
Under the current language, they would have to seek a conditional
Correct.
use permit.
And there are additional fees. The more applications you have, the more fees there are associated with the project. So it could be eliminating one hoop to jump through.
But do both of those permits and the fees paying for the administrative work done, both of those iterations involve sort of a due process that we need to retain?
That's up for you and council to decide on whether or not a conditional use permit is needed in these cases, and the staff has laid out our reasons why we don't think one is needed because the density is not changing.
Anything further, Mr. Hopkins? Or anyone else?
Well, I'm, yeah.
Still
I mean,
thinking
I'm
about it?
not done thinking about it, but I'm not, there's nothing immediate I need to ask.
Mr. Fell?
I'll weigh in a little bit on to I don't know, address Lou's issue in a way that I seriously doubt that there's any garage in the city of Urbana that you could convert, do anything to make a living space, certainly without a building permit, and probably without tearing it down, because it doesn't have the structure required under the building code to hold up a residential use. Typically, they have a little, unless you had a really good garage builder, it doesn't have a footing, doesn't have a foundation,
Yeah.
has a little piece of turned down curb, and you can't build on top of that, right? So unless you have a mega garage built probably off the setback far enough to conform to what the regular setbacks are, you're going to have to tear this thing down and rebuild it anyway and get a building permit, in which case it's a residential use, and now you're not going to be able to put it 18 inches from the property line anyway, because you have to start over. So I have to say I'm comfortable with the way the language is, because I seriously doubt anybody could convert a garage to a living space without a building permit, which is going to kick everything else back in.
Well, they're going to have to have a,
Right, they have to have a building permit.
yeah.
Yeah.
So in the 4 cases we're looking at, I want to, I guess I'm thinking sort of an empirical way, an inductive way to get at this, because we're being presented with these 4 cases as a reason for doing this. Each of these were to allow a second floor of garage to be used as an apartment. Now, did these 4 garages all have a second floor already? That, as Andrew was bringing up, was already going to meet code to be an apartment?
I can say that the one on Oregon, I used to walk my dog around past this all the time, and they added the second floor.
Oh, that's new. We did that.
You did the one in Poplar? Yeah, that's the one I couldn't quite tell
Yeah.
from the
It's not there yet.
Google.
I didn't go look at the
Well,
other.
yeah, it isn't
It's in
there
the
yet,
seven.
because
On
the Google
Oregon,
image for
603.
that is
603
from
East
April.
Oregon.
But there are too many trees, so I
Right,
couldn't
it's
see the
just right-
placement.
Right behind us here.
So
Do you,
Yeah,
they added a second floor?
on that one they did. Yeah, I remember when they were
And
building.
did that one require a variance? Because it sure looks like it's closer than
I didn't
5
go-
feet.
yeah, I
But it's
don't
a
know.
corner lot, so
Yeah, right.
what's a side yard and a backyard is tricky, I don't know.
I didn't go measure it, but I think you're right. I think it's probably closer than 5 feet.
Yeah.
So I was not here at the City of Urbana for that ZBA case. I think one of the interesting things is that these are ZBA cases, and so we do get a lot of inquiries for these conditional use and major variance things. And in the future, there's this opportunity to, so I know 1208 was a scrape. They scraped the garage to build that. For 603, it was addition remodel. For South Popular.
Addition remodel to the
I'm
garage?
sorry, they added the second
Yeah.
floor. For South Popular, I'm pretty sure that was completely new. Yeah.
That's a deep lot with an alley, so it's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, that one I could figure out how that would work.
812 South Ray Street, I was the case manager for that, and that would be a completely tear down garage and rebuild a small thing for their mother to live as she ages right next to the
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
the mother-in-law
common. It's
apartment.
common.
I
The
get it,
mother-in-law.
yeah.
And I think that one, they requested variances in part to save trees, not necessarily because they couldn't meet the setbacks.
So if they apply for variances to ZBA, and they are also required to get a conditional use permit from ZBA, is that treated as a single case, or is 2 cases?
It's a single case,
fees?
but 2 fees. Single case, 2 fees. Each thing is recorded individually, which has separate fees. It requires an analysis by staff for a different set of criteria. So there is significantly more work involved, even if it's going to the same body on the same night, and significant cost also.
Significant cost equals what?
I think it's $175 each case, so the conditional use permit is $175, plus that adds a few extra words to their legal ad, which adds money, plus the recording fee is $64, I think, each thing. So it does start to add up, and if
Yeah,
it's not
but-
necessary,
But not backbreaking for most construction projects. But anyway, okay.
I-
I understand that part. So if what we're focused on is this particular case, this particular type of case. My reaction might be to address this particular case, because I think the confusion in the one comment we got is so great. And my confusion wasn't too bad either, too good, whatever you want to say, that we could make this much more precise for the purpose we're trying to do. I think, there's so many versions of this, I have trouble
Yeah.
keeping track. There was something said about R1 and R2 explicitly in one version. Is that in the current version?
Yeah.
Lily's going to pull up.
Oh, here
that
it is, okay.
slide.
Yeah, okay, it's under 5. Now, because I have no idea what the implications might be in all other zoning districts, I'm inclined not to make this apply to all zoning districts and then create exceptions. So I would leave it that conditional use permits are required as it currently states, except in R3, that duplexes, which is all that's permitted in R3, can be permitted by right in 2 buildings. And if, it seems to me that statement handles everything we're trying to handle without worrying about sort of unintended consequences of all this other stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. So if, let's say it's a commercial district, and somebody wants to establish another second use that's requires a conditional use permit, then the way I read this, they still need to get a conditional use permit, right?
So I just want to make sure I understand. So right now, today, the language reads, in all zoning districts, more than one principal use is allowed. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, this is talking about single building, never mind. So are you asking that, yes, so if you need a conditional use permit, you need a conditional use permit.
Right. So
even
we're
if
not
it's in a
really, I
commercial.
think his point is we're not really changing the requirement for anything but R3. Is-
Yeah, we are at the moment changing the requirement for everything.
if it's
Except
a-
R1
if
and
it's-
R2.
I guess if it's allowed by right, yeah. If the 2 uses are allowed by right in any district, right?
Okay, there's just way too much going on here for me to cope with. There's an entirely separate question in my mind, which I haven't even gotten to yet, of whether we're allowing 2 different principal uses on a single lot. And if they're both permitted by right, at the moment, as I read the ordinance, if they're in one building, they're by right without a conditional use permit. If they're in 2 buildings, except for R4 through R6 multifamily, they require a conditional use permit.
One of the reasons we wanted to change this section is because the way it's written is not abundantly clear. So the way it's written now, it says, unless it's exempted below, and there's a bunch of things below, yes, you're right, you need to get a conditional use permit. Then you need to sort through the exemptions. So then the first exemption is that the uses are permitted by right. So if they're permitted by right, you don't need a conditional use permit. Do you have clarification, Lily? on that?
Yeah, well,
No.
Yeah.
And I'm dealing specifically with paragraph C that talks about principal structures. I think the intent, and as we look around, a commercial property in particular it doesn't make any sense to require them to get a conditional use permit to have 2 retail stores on one lot in a
Okay.
B3, for instance.
And I sort of agree with that, but that's what I'm trying to figure out what the original language actually says.
Right. So in a hypothetical, just because it's important for me to understand what you were thinking, if a Burger King wanted to have a sushi place in a separate structure on the same lot, if they met all the other development regulations and everything was permitted by right, I mean, they met the parking, they met everything, and the lot was big enough, basically, that's what that means.
Okay, so when I read V3C as it currently stated, unless as exempted below, in any zoning district, more than one principal structure per lot or parcel of land may be allowed under conditional use procedures meeting the following criteria. That says to me that in any zoning district, more than one principal structure per lot may be allowed under conditional use procedures. That is, going to the ZBA for a conditional use.
Yeah, that's pretty
And
confusing.
if that's not been practice for 50
Eons.
years, then we should perhaps correct it, but I think we need to know that we're doing that.
Well, and I think the original memo dated May 15th on page 2, I mean, the first paragraph is general. It talks about currently an additional principal structure on a lot is only allowed with a conditional use permit, even if the use of the structure is permitted by right in the zoning district.
Yeah,
The
okay.
proposed change would allow, so we haven't focused on that because frankly, the discussion here and with the council member, and I think probably on a listserv or two, was about the duplex issue. And so we have focused on that because that is what is, we wanted to make sure people understood what the change was. But yes, so the proposed change tries to clarify what we think at some point was changed, and they didn't mean to change it this way because that isn't how it's practiced.
So it isn't? We don't require a conditional? So why do we also have somewhere else in the ordinance, which I don't think we've changed, that multifamily can have multiple structures without a conditional use permit?
That's number 3, C3. It's called out specifically for multiple family, but there's no exemption here for industrial or other commercial.
I understand, but so we're getting rid of that.
We're trying to clarify to say that if your
Right.
use allows, or if you are allowed that use on your site, that you can put it in more than one structure with these exceptions of R1, R2, and then being a little bit more specific with R3.
Right, okay. So I don't know whether anybody else has thought through whether there's any conditional, whether there are any reasons to think about in downtown business district, for example, whether we want multiple structures by right. I mean, I just, initially, that wasn't what this was about, so I haven't even thought about it, and I haven't heard any discussion of it, I guess, so.
Tell me if I'm in another world, but would it incentivize, would this change incentivize an increase of structures? And then would it eventually change the character of a neighborhood or an area of town? And would it be a green space issue or a stormwater infrastructure issue at some point for runoff? I mean, I don't know
Well, I think when we were having this discussion, we were thinking, okay, let's think about parks. What if they have two major structures? That's two structures. It's not an exemption in CRE. Oh, no. What about schools? They have two schools on one lot. That's not what this code says. So there's so many instances where it just, this regulation didn't seem to make sense, and it could never have been applied that way. So it's already, in thinking of the residential, it's already been addressed with multifamily, because that's normal, right, to have a complex of apartment buildings. And then with the exceptions of R1, R2, and R3, that, you know, you don't really need to worry about the residential neighborhood. So really what we're looking at is the CRE, and the commercial and the industrial lots, which often have multiple structures. So we couldn't think of an instance where it would, because of these exceptions for the lower density residential, where it would create an issue and where it isn't often done.
So currently, if you live on a large enough lot, and many people do, and you wanted to have a mother-in-law suite, or you wanted to tear down the garage and make something where you could store cars and people, or just people, if you followed all the rules of our development regulations and your property was zoned for a duplex, you could build a duplex and tear your house down, or you could build another structure like a mother-in-law suite or a smaller house to accommodate that need. So you're already allowed to do duplexes.
In
That
R3.
helps. In R3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, all we're, I mean, there's the inductive side and the logical side. The inductive side is what we've got if people want to do garage conversions. So they're going to add another building to a lot, which does have an effect on the character of things. It is also true, however, that if you attached your garage to your house and built the second apartment on top of that garage, you would not need a conditional use permit, because that would be considered one structure. So, I mean, some of the things that people are worried about, I think they don't understand that you can already build a duplex by right. That's not the issue. Of course, you can't on Delaware or anywhere in Moona,
Sure.
in fact. But I didn't
Right.
really need to bring that up. So I guess, I think I'm comfortable allowing it to apply to all of the uses. I'm trying to think of examples, other than residential. I'm not
Well,
done with
that's the
residential.
problem. I think we spent so much time thinking about the residential component that when you brought it up today, I hadn't thought of use scenarios in commercial or even industrial or conservation.
Yeah, industrial, I
yeah.
don't think I don't see it's going to matter. In
Probably not.
conservation, in CRE, it's not going to matter, as far as I can think. In most commercial, it's not going to matter. The only ones that aren't completely clear to me are downtown, whatever it is,
Yeah.
the most intense downtown one, where on a single lot, we might actually not want people to build separate structures in a kind of form-based code attitude. And, I mean, I'd have to look at the,
What if it's neighborhood business and I want to build a shop next to my house? Is that an example? That just
Well,
popped into my head.
Yeah, but wait, that's actually goes back to the other case, where you have, I can come up with a zoning category, but let's say you have a residential use in a zoning category, either as a non-conforming or as a permitted use, where you could also have a shop. So can you build by right the shop, a
That's-
different use on the same lot in a separate building?
I think with the change,
And
you
this
can,
gets to
yeah.
the home occupation issue
Sort of. Yeah.
whether you can actually build a business building on your lot as a separate building and claim it's a home occupation and therefore a residential principal structure. I'm just trying to think through the
Mr. Fell, save us.
Well, no, I'm not going to save this. I'm going to ask staff a question. How are we defining a separate structure? Because I can build a separate structure slammed right up against another
Yeah.
building. Downtown Urbana is all separate structures, but it's basically one giant building, right? I can build two buildings right up next to each other.
I mean, is that really a question, Andrew?
It
Because
is, no, it
it's-
really is a question, because I think
Well, does it matter for this, I guess is what I'm asking, because.
Well, it does. I think it does,
Yeah.
because if we can put these two buildings together, we can build one massive thing that maybe somebody doesn't want, as opposed to two small things.
Well,
That's a question, that's a staff question. Does it matter to staff?
But if you're meeting the FAR and the OSR and the setbacks, then that's kind of already defining the form. You could have
No, I
smushed them together
agree. I
or
guess
not.
the intent of my statement or question is staff okay with that? That we don't necessarily, to build separate structures, need two buildings. We can build one big building as two structures, under the building code.
Mhm.
So what are separate structures to zoning? What are separate structures? I know what they are in the building code, but I don't know what they are in our zoning ordinance.
Well, I'm not sure that it actually is defined. So unless you have some
Yeah,
thoughts, we
we
could
would-
just rely on the building code.
We would defer to the building code.
Okay, I mean,
Yeah.
if that's good for you, it's good for me.
I mean, it's a matter of, we're looking at impacts to surrounding properties. That's what zoning's looking for. So if the massing is about the same, and if it has an extra wall in between it, doesn't matter from a zoning standpoint, right? It's still the same amount of stuff, or people, or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
There are also no, I'm trying to think whether there are any building code regulations or whatever of the minimum separation of two structures that are not actually joined, which could also, I mean, I don't know how we deal with that.
We don't have to, building code does.
And there is some. About how far apart they have to be.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's probably a
Okay.
little
Oh, it's
off
very
off this case. So, yeah,
Okay.
let's bring it back. Mr. Weisskopf, did you have?
If he had the question, Mr. Hopkins had the question, can you build a structure and have a commercial use or something? The question. I mean, that's a hypothetical
Well,
that
it
can't
depends on the
happen.
zoning district.
Right.
Right, but in R3.
Not in our.
No, in
Right.
R3 you couldn't.
I
But
mean,
you
I
could have a home-based
suppose, so
business.
we go through some of this sort of like what if, what if, what if.
Right.
So I think, for instance, country club is allowed in R3. So let's say you own a country club and, you know, if you also want to have a duplex on there, it's 40 acres, you know, does it matter? No. So
Separate things.
if you can have a second use because they're permitted uses, it's pretty far-fetched, yes, but we do try to run through all of these potential what-if scenarios.
Anything further? I mean, to me, neighborhood business was, now that we've thought about it, would be the most likely place where this could happen outside of R3. But I don't know if I have a problem with that or not.
So,
I would just say, oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I
Mr.
just,
Weisskopf.
I don't know, I understand, Mr. Hopkins, you have a lot of potential concerns, but I feel like you haven't proved that there's any potential problems here. I mean, hypothetically even, I haven't heard like, so there might be room for something to happen, but what are you worried about happening?
okay, so separate some issues. On the, does this apply to everything? My concern there was, nobody had talked about it. And so I mean, it wasn't even clear initially whether it did, as far as I could tell. So I'm now reasonably comfortable with the notion that the default is you can have multiple structures.
Mhm.
Then the question comes back to the exceptions, well, to R3 in particular, and then the exceptions for R1 and R2. And I'm trying to imagine in R1 or R2, how you could have a second principal use.
That would be the country club example, or
Oh,
or a church with a house where
yeah,
If
okay,
they were
and
That
actually,
was it.
those
If
were
that's
the
happening.
examples I remember now, because I did go look at the church with a house was one, but it also means a house with a church.
Correct.
well, a church would require special use permits. So some of these things, there's another level of review.
Well, we just did an
Okay.
apartment with the church in Boone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
It was in one structure.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was a weird.
Okay. But the other use is, country club isn't a special use, right? I don't have that thing.
I don't.
No,
didn't
it's
bring
What are the other
permitted,
uses?
I
Because there's
think,
some unexpected ones. Agriculture is one.
Right, so if you wanted to do cropping, agriculture, and a duplex,
Well, you could,
You could build you could have a
Yeah.
field with a machine shed that's an accessory use. Field is the primary use.
unless the machine shed is larger than an accessory use.
Right, right.
In which
Right.
case, then it's a principal structure, right? So
yeah,
then,
right,
there you go, there's your example. If you have too large of an accessory use, or accessory structure.
right.
The ordinance should cover that.
Yeah,
right.
okay. So I think that part's okay.
Okay.
But now for the R3, when it says, as a conditional use, if one or more of the uses are allowed as a conditional use, well, then that's the old wording. It's now as
It's-
a
it pretty
conditional
much
use,
says-
or if it's a conditional use, and a special use if it's a special use.
Right.
And so, one or more of the uses, so this is the church example, or the country club example, in R3, which is what we're really talking about.
Can I ask,
Ms. Dargo, yeah.
can I ask Mr. Weiskopf a question?
Sure.
I think maybe your wheels turn in a little bit of a different way, and you had mentioned that Mr. Hopkins hadn't thought of any of the potential problems. I don't know if this is appropriate, but as a moneymaker, do you see potential problems, or can you vocalize any potential problems that if you can place yourself sort of in that?
I guess I was just more, yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I guess I was just struggling to see kind of what the, I mean, I guess I understand thinking through it and thinking possible hypotheticals is helpful, but maybe I'm not correct on what I'm seeing here, but correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the staff is saying this streamlines the process that there are already layers of protection for, right? By doing this. And my impression is Mr. Hopkins is saying there's these unforeseen consequences of doing this, that we don't yet know what they are, but they're of such an extent that we should
Well, we
at
just-
least think about
We
them.
need to understand.
Yeah.
the
Right,
full
at least
full
think about
extent
them.
of what we're doing to the ordinance, yeah.
But, so I mean, and I would ultimately, it's true, side with what the staff, how they view, having multi-layers of requirements under certain zoning. So, I mean, I'm a less is more type of person, that's true. And as far as the time it takes to do things and the level of administration that you pile on to a process, just means more time and energy and reports and things like that. So just in a very gut level, I am for the less of that. And then my only point to Mr. Hopkins would just be, or just generally to us, would be if we think there's some problem that we're going to be creating, it behooves us to be able to at least say what that is. I mean, if there's something we have to hedge against, then let's do it, but we're essentially pretty much talking about R3 here, and that's just pretty limited anyway, and
Well, I mean, that's what I thought coming in here, that we were pretty much talking about R3, but after what Mr. Hopkins pointed out, the old language really, now the commercial is more of a concern to me than the garage.
But
apartment.
doesn't the
Now-
commercial already have all this versatility within its zoning? I mean, there's a lot more you can do by
Well,
right
it's
for
really
all
not
these
even
other
B3
things.
or any of that. It's really, to me, I start thinking of neighborhood business, where you've got this, you've got a mix of, I don't think they're incompatible uses, but they're not as compatible as, say, strictly residential or strictly business. There's setbacks and everything that protects all that. There's,
There's a-
all those things still apply. so-
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole business process for someone to operate a business
Sure,
on an
yeah.
R3 or R2 or R1 that they have to go through.
That, a home-based business, yeah.
Right.
But I'm not worried about that,
No,
no.
so, I don't know.
So, anything further on this? Those are all good points. Turned out to be more vexatious than I thought.
Just because you mentioned the neighborhood business, so I'm going to assume you mean like the B1 and the B2 zoning districts?
Correct. Anywhere where by right you can have
Um,
the mix.
Just to give you a sense, we've been looking at B1 in particular often recently because someone has tried to redevelop a site, and Lily, there's 27 B1
Yes,
properties?
correct.
Or parcels, as the case may be, in the city, and they're all, with, I think, probably one exception, really tiny, and you can barely fit one building on them.
And there are 81.
That may be true.
81% of them are non-conforming already. So
You're talking
it's-
about on Main Street over here?
Those are most of those are
B2?
B2 properties.
Okay.
Actually, I'm talking about Bruce's, I'm talking about the gas station on North Goodwin, former gas station. Now, it was just been approved to get a conditional use for a contractor shop. I'm talking about Race in Washington, that's a classic. Cafe
Oh, yeah,
Paradiso,
yeah,
another
right.
classic B1 property.
Right.
All of these are small properties. Most of them, almost all of them, unless they're vacant, which was a portion of that not 81%. 81% of them are already non-conforming. It is fairly difficult to establish just one use, to establish a second principal structure within their development regulations on the lots. That contractor shop had to get 2 major variances to meet fairly liberal for our parking regulations, just to meet some of the parking that it was required for a 1,600 square foot building on a sizable corner lot. So while that's a really interesting thing, it's actually fairly difficult to establish one structure currently. 2 structures would be very, very difficult unless you have enough space. And is that something that you're uncomfortable with? Because if you have enough space, maybe it would be a good case.
I don't know that I'm uncomfortable with any of it, except that I hadn't thought about it,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So
Yeah.
it wasn't until we got into this discussion that I started with Mr. Hopkins. I mean, hey, that's pretty big.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
that's a pretty
just
big
that
change. Yeah.
we just did a lot of research on neighborhood businesses, so I can,
Okay, I've got a couple of suggested edits, but I think I'm ready to go.
All right.
So the V2C, I think I'm reading
I think that's the
the
right
final
one.
version, says, "In any zoning district, more than one principal structure per lot may be as follows."
Maybe allowed.
Is there a word missing there? I don't know what the standard zoning language is, but,
We could use allowed so that we don't use permitted.
oh, I see, permitted, but
Because you're
yes,
gonna permit it.
I get it. Anyway, so I think allowed, some
Yeah.
word is needed there that is consistent with the zoning, all right? So a question about number 2 that might be ambiguous or not. If the existing use is an approved special use, do you need a special use to add a non-special use to that parcel?
What this is trying to do is correct the omission in the current text, which doesn't even talk about special uses.
Yeah.
So it's trying to say, if you want to put 2 structures on a lot, and one of those needs a conditional use permit, you need to get a conditional use permit for that use. If one of them needs a special use permit, you need to get a special use permit for that use.
So if the second one that happens, assume they happen in sequence, does not require a special use, it doesn't need a special use permit.
Correct, then it's
Correct.
allowed
Okay.
by right.
I
Okay.
just want to make sure that that's actually what that meant, because
It actually doesn't say that, I
it
think.
doesn't say that, but I think most people would be happy interpreting it that way. And then, on point 4, if you could somehow in a few words add the explanation that Lily gave, or just whatever, because there's a very specific reason it says may, and in a way, it's a requirement based on a particular condition. So I think it could be worded slightly better. And then in 5B, I think we should strike no lot will have more than 2 dwelling units. Because to me, that's like undermining the logic of the zoning ordinance. That's already true, and to put it here is like, okay, are we going to put that everywhere for everything?
How about I just offer different language which might meet Mr. Fell's approval and maybe isn't as obvious as what you're worried about fixing? Can I give that a shot?
Which one are you talking about?
That's-
5B or?
5B, yes.
Okay.
In the R3 zoning district, no more than 2 principal structures and no more than 2 dwelling units are allowed per lot, or something to that effect.
You already can't
What-
have more than 2, right?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to get at is, I get that we're saying you can't have more than 2 structures.
Mhm.
And there, nowhere else in the ordinance, given that it says you could have 2 structures in R1, which means 1 dwelling unit can have 2 structures. So we're saying in 5B that even though 1 dwelling unit can have 2 structures in R1 or 2 with a conditional use permit, you can't do that in R3. That's a specific restriction that's not said anywhere else. But that you can't have more than 2 dwelling units is the definition of R3. So it seems to me
We were trying to be abundantly clear because that was an issue that was expressed to us as a concern by a council member because he
Okay.
was afraid that
I
it
mean,
was not.
It's
it
redundant.
Crystal
doesn't
clear.
change anything.
It's
It just,
redundant.
it seems really strange as a way of writing a zoning ordinance. Anyway, those are
Okay,
thoughts there.
well, any further discussion? Are we ready to move it? One way or the other?
Let's see, I'll move approval of plan case 2377 T19, recommendation of approval to council with the addition of the word allowed under,
B3, 5B,
yeah,
or whatever. Yeah.
V3,
It's V2
5,
now.
V2C. And a parenthetical in 4 if possible, and the, I prefer Lori's compound sentence for 5B.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Hopkins with additional suggestions for city staff.
Well, those are changes, that's the
Correct.
motion.
Okay, yes, specific changes for city staff, let me put it that way. Is there a second?
I'll say.
Second by Mr. Fell. All right, is there any further discussion? Can we have a roll call, please?
Dustin Allred,
Yeah, I'm for it.
Jane Billman,
Yes.
Andrew Fell,
Yes.
Tyler Fitch,
Yes.
Lou Hopkins,
Yes.
Nancy Odrago,
Yes.
Jonah Weisskopf.
Yes.
The motion passes. And is there a city council date associated with it?
August 5th.
August 5th. All right. There is no old business. There is a new public hearing. This is Plan Case 2384T19, application by the zoning administrator to amend the ordinance with minor changes to Article 4, 5, 10, 11, and 13, and to make any other changes deemed necessary to provide clarity and ease of administration. It's another omnibus text amendment.
This one's shorter.
Much. Apologize, there is a lot of paperwork. Thank you so much for that amazing discussion. That was great. Let's go on to slightly shorter. So, zoning ordinance omnibus 3, Plan Case 2384-T-19. We have 7 articles that we are here to amend. You're going to see the proposed changes in red, bold and underlined. You're going to see text that's unchanged, just plain in red, and if it's removed text, it's going to be black with a strike through. For the first of changes, we have Article 4. For here, we have two districts that are overlays that were included in here. One is Boneyard Creek District is still very much a district, very much an overlay, but none of the other overlays are in this list, and there's no property that's zoned Boneyard Creek District. There's properties that are zoned B4 or MOR. The last one, BDR, has a slightly different tail. Business Development and Redevelopment District was also part of the Business Development and Redevelopment Commission, which has not met in untold but very long amount of time. It was created in 1974 and has not met in many, many years. And BDR has been removed many years ago off of our zoning map, and it's not something that we use except Public Works uses for their streetscape ordinance from the 80s when BDR was a thing. And so for this part, we have the last vestiges of BDR. Within the purpose of districts, we have the BDR, Business Development and Redevelopment District. The description's still there. Again, isn't anything that exists on a map, so we're trying to kind of clean that up. Section 5-3, Table of Permitted Uses by District. Here we discuss and we put out that there are additional regulations within the Boneyard Creek District. Properties within the Boneyard Creek District are subject to special rules and procedures as set forth in Section 8-4. It's the parking regulations. And then we're also proposing striking the section below it, E, C section, as you see. There's additional text below this that actually refers to that, and it would just be calling it out twice. So, Section 6-8, so we're moving to our development regulations article, outdoor lighting requirements. We make reference to, I'm pretty sure accidentally, to the sign article instead of in this article, Section 6-8-E, which addresses the exact same thing that it's discussing right there. So it was a little bit of a typo. Article 8, parking and access. Here we're just addressing that certain things have changed the lettering in Section V-5-3, especially if, Plan Commission recommends the City Council for Omnibus 2, and also if the City Council passes, the numbering and lettering would be a little off, and we're just clarifying the references. Section 10-2, extension and expansion of nonconformities. There's a lot about this section that could use a little bit of looking at, but when we were coming across and helping a landowner, we were having staff having a really hard time understanding what the intent. So we're trying to clarify the intent of this section. We included the text above here, B, because it's what we're trying to clarify. No nonconforming use of land except accessory parking shall be extended or expanded. C, no nonconforming building, structure, and we're suggesting adding, or accessory parking area shall be enlarged, extended, expanded, or altered in a way which would increase its nonconformity. So that has been something that could have read either way without that being added. So we're proposing adding the text so it's a little bit more clear. For Article 11, we actually have quite a few little changes, and so I'm going to pull up the text. For Section 11-2, Plan Commission, we're suggesting a couple of changes, really to make this a little bit clearer with the Open Meetings Act and use some of the same language we used for the Design Review Board and the MOR Board before it was in the previous 2018 text amendment.
Can I get a point of clarification really
Yeah.
quick before you jump into this? So in what we're looking at on the screen, you're striking the first part, you're striking what is now all of B1, and then adding, and on the paper copy I'm looking at, you're not striking.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. That was a change. So that was really just an accident. And so now you're seeing it corrected on the screen.
So you want it to be stricken.
It's going to be stricken and
you're diminishing the
rewrote
powers of the chairman.
below.
Well, actually, we're making sure you don't have to meet every 3 months just 'cause.
I was actually thinking about that. Really. Yeah. Okay. No, I just really want to know what's your intention. So the intention is to strike.
B1 and rewrite it below
Right.
under the underlined text.
We probably
Thank you.
better mention that in a motion,
Yes. Thank you.
just because.
And then the numbering has been corrected below, as you can see, for striking 2, which is addressing the Open Meeting Act. So the 2 have been addressed already in the proposed new text. Powers and duties. For here, Plan Commission shall have the following powers and duties. Rather, it says refer to Chapter 18 of the Urbana City Code, which there is a Chapter 18 talking about the powers and duties.
I hope there is.
Of Plan
Excuse
Commission.
me. Mr. Hawkins?
Could you scroll back up to number 2?
Yeah. Absolutely, right
No,
here.
wait, okay, the presence of a majority of the members of a plan commission shall constitute a quorum. Do we define that as currently appointed members? I'm trying to remember.
Yes.
So if
Yeah.
there are only 8, 4 is a, well,
Oh, I'm
Right.
sorry.
if there are only 7 appointed, 4 is a majority?
I'm
it
sorry,
quorum?
I was answering a different question that you were not asking.
Oh,
So I would need to look that up, but yeah, I don't know.
I have a hunch that that does not say what it is supposed to say, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm under the
Anyway,
impression that 5 is always a quorum.
These are things to write down for the next round, not to.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if something is just incorrect, we can certainly change it in time for council. So we can check this with our legal division.
What's the status of the alternate member issue? Is,
I'm going to bring it up to the mayor shortly.
okay, I mean, but we don't want to
Not tonight.
complicate this.
It's not in
No,
here,
no,
it's in
okay.
city
Right,
code, so it won't even come to you. I'll update everyone in a future meeting about what it is that we're talking about, because not everybody knows what it is that we're talking about, so.
So our current practice is that a quorum is 5, am I correct?
Yes, because I think
In all circumstances.
yes. So I will verify, though, and if this language needs to be tweaked, we can do that, because
Yeah.
it needs to be right.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
All right. And so I think that covers the bigger small thing that we're talking about. And then lastly, there's Article 13.
Lily, you didn't point out the ZBA change is the same in terms of the Open Meetings Act, but I just
Right.
wanted to make sure that they were.
Oh, I think I probably extracted not all the pages for that.
I think you said it, but it's
Yeah.
worth noting that you made this same change regarding the Open Meetings Act to the Zoning Board of Appeals.
Right. That's, here we go. So yes, same changes to Zoning Board of Appeals. And then you can see the nothing else below. Apologize, must have extracted one page. So with that, the last big little change is addressing that the table of contents didn't have section 13-8 Southeast Urbana Overlay District in the Article 13.
Great. Thank you. Any questions from Ms. Wilcox? Mr. Hopkins?
Was the
Or city
thing
council.
about voting by the council in this change, or was that in the other one? The
That
other
was
one?
in the other
That
one.
was the first one, I think.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
even the second one.
Okay, all right, never mind, I'll ask that question later.
Would you like me to read the summary of findings?
Sure.
Okay. Summary of findings is the proposed amendment will assist with the daily administration and enforcement of the zoning ordinance by improving clarity and updating language to meet current professional practices. Number 2, the proposed amendment is consistent with goals and objectives of the 2005 Urbana Comprehensive Plan regarding updating various sections of the zoning ordinance. Number 3, the proposed amendment will update the zoning ordinance and to ensure that the regulatory environment more closely matches the goals and policies of the city. And number 4, the proposed amendment conforms to notification of the requirements for the zoning ordinance as required by the State Zoning Act. The options are also the same as the last case. Would you like me to read those?
Please.
Okay. The Plan Commission has the following options for a recommendation to the Urbana City Council regarding Plan Case 2384-T-19. 1, forward this case to City Council with recommendation to approve as presented. 2, forward this case to City Council with a recommendation to approve as modified by specific suggested changes. Or 3, forward this case to City Council with a recommendation to deny.
Thank
And-
you.
Staff recommends approval.
Approval. Yes. Any discussion on this?
We can't do it yet?
You can do it.
No, I mean,
Uh,
didn't we need to find out what it meant by quorum?
Oh.
I'm suggesting that if it conflicts with state law, that we can certainly go ahead and change the language to confirm, or to conform to state or local ordinance in time for the council. But if that is direction to staff to make that correction if needed in time for the ordinance. I mean, or we could continue it and bring it back to you, but I think it would be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, so, as I understand it, our practice is that a quorum is defined as a majority of the number of persons to be appointed to the Plan Commission. That is, it's a majority of 9 by definition.
That's also my understanding, so I can
Right.
confirm what's right and make sure this language reflects
Yeah,
what's
and
correct.
if that's not right, we could change our practices.
Correct. So I think we're okay. It's a good
Yeah.
concern, but. Anything further? Move it.
Nike it.
I make a motion that we move plan case number 2384-T-19 to the city council with a recommendation of approval.
Motion by Mr. Fell. Second by Ms. Billman.
Did you want to clarify striking out also?
Oh, yeah, with the, yeah.
Section
Back up to the
11-2,
motion.
paragraph B1?
Yes.
Strike that out, okay.
Re-second. I'm sorry, I got a little ahead. All right, so there's a motion on the table. Any further discussion? Can we have a roll call when you're ready?
Dustin Allred,
Yes.
Jane Billman,
Yes.
Andrew Fell,
Yes.
Tyler Fitch,
Yes?
Lou Hopkins,
Yes.
Nancy Odrago,
Yes.
Jonah Weiskopf.
Yes.
The motion passes. And is that August 5th as well? Okay, great. Okay, no new business? No audience participation? Do we have a staff report?
No, and it's been a while since we met, so I don't remember what case you heard last, so I could look that up, though, and let you know how that went in council.
It was the one with the development on University with,
Oh, yes, that was approved.
awesome.
Next to Taco Bell.
The one where Euros, yeah,
Here's yours.
Euros.
It was delayed a week or sent to committee. Ultimately, it was approved.
Great, thanks. We don't have a study session, therefore we're adjourned.